We are here to talk about InScribe and how institutions can think about the role of digital communities in student success and in supporting your learners, especially, coming up in the new year and going into 2024. My name is Katie Kapler. If you don't know me, I am the co-founder and CEO here at InScribe. And I am joined today by Danielle Bonner. She runs all of our sales and marketing operations, and she helps keep us on track in these webinars. So she'll be keeping an eye on the chat as well, and is encouraged to interrupt me when questions come in so I can address them during the conversation. Also in the chat, as Danielle mentioned, is Fred Scott, who some of you have probably heard from either before this webinar, and certainly when the follow-up comes out, that'll be coming from Fred. So just wanted to make sure you saw his face and knew who he was. We'd also love to know who we have here today. So it would be wonderful if you could just take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat. Just like, where are you from? What role do you have? If there's something specific that you're working on or thinking about that brought you here today, we'd love to know it. It'll just help us make sure that we address anything that might be related to that topic. I will say that sort of just to set up the context for this webinar, if you're not familiar with InScribe, we're going to show the product a little bit later, but just at a high level, InScribe is a virtual community platform. So we're designed to bring students together with peers, faculty, and staff in these virtual spaces so that they can collaborate, ask questions, get to know each other. We really work across the entire student life cycle. So you'll see people implementing InScribe for communities during the admissions process, for example, or for learning communities around core academic topics like math and English. Today, we're going to focus on what we would call a peer-to-peer community. So this is a community that lives above the classroom level. It's really kind of designed for students by students, and it's about giving them a place to come together to talk about whatever they want to talk about and share and support one another. And part of why we wanted to have this conversation today is we just came out of conference season. I don't know if any of you attended any of the conferences in the fall, but one of the things that really struck us in those conferences was the frequency that people are now talking about topics like student sense of belonging and connection, peer connection, when they are talking about student success. That's a core element of what we also talk about and do at InScribe. And so we just knowing that it's top of mind for so many people, and the sense that we got from the conferences was strategically important. We're trying a few things. We're not totally sure what to do in this context. So we want to learn from each other and understand what other organizations are doing. So that's what we're going to talk about a little today. Some of our partners, how they're implementing the InScribe product specifically to go after this area. We always think it's helpful to just start with a little bit of a definition around student belonging. This is just one version of that definition. There's actually several out on the internet if you go take a look, but they tend to have some commonalities. So you can read here, student belonging is when students have a positive and purposeful connections, believe their authentic self is valued and accepted, and that they feel heard by their community. So if you look at belonging across thought leadership, publications, research, you tend to find these three elements very consistently. So it's about having real relationships with your institution, but also with the individuals at your institution. It's about feeling like you can be yourself with those people and that they actually like you and find that your contributions are important, and that when you talk, people are actually listening. So that all sounds very sort of obvious that we want our students to feel that way, but it's not always easy to accomplish, especially in today's world, where we're finding a lot of changes to how students are approaching, especially higher education and their learning. So let's talk a little bit about why community itself is important in this context. So I think many people know, especially since COVID, we see a big shift towards virtual and asynchronous types of learning. Even traditional schools post-pandemic are finding that many of their students are asking for their classes to be in this more flexible format. And that's wonderful because it affords that flexibility either in the hybrid model or for students who are learning fully online. But it creates a challenge in the sense that students don't have the just natural opportunity to run into each other in the hallway after class to chat, where you would have those sort of casual conversations about what's happening in the day, what you just learned in the classroom. And those conversations are a lot of where these relationships are formed and where students start to feel that sense of connection. So you can see here this idea that almost 70% of students will self-report that when they're learning online, they're missing that opportunity. So we have to be aware of that and think about other ways that we can recreate that for our learners. But we have to honor the fact that when students are asking for these different types of modalities, it's because they really need the flexibility for their learning, for how they're achieving support, for how they're interacting and connecting with others. So being cognizant that the flexibility, the proximity still really matters to these individuals is really key. I won't go into the studies today, but needless to say, there are many, many studies out there that connect student sense of belonging with positive student outcomes. And that's not just in the short term. So in the short term, we see things like improved persistence, better grades, more likely to graduate. But the studies have also shown that when a student leaves their institution, that increased sense of belonging also contributes to better success once they enter their career field. So that benefit of belonging can extend up to 10 years. So you're not just doing your student, a good service when they're with you, but you're actually setting them up for success in the long term. And this is really critical for all learners, but as we know, particularly critical for students who are coming to us from underserved backgrounds or from families and communities that don't have as much context or experience with the higher education market. That's an individual who's particularly vulnerable to potentially feeling like this isn't the right fit for me. I'm not adequately, prepared to be successful in this context. And so really reaching those students early and helping them feel connected is absolutely critical. So when we look at the outcomes, we touched on this already, so I won't spend a ton of time, but one of the things that we always look at when we're putting our communities together is, are we helping our institutions improve persistence and improve outcomes for their learners? So really quantitative measures. Are we creating more equitable outcomes across the student population? So if you think about, well, and we'll talk about this when we dig into the community, but part of how we get to that is, if we are requiring engagement to always be face-to-face, synchronous, requiring you to raise your hand and speak up in front of a big group of people, there's a whole population of learners who are going to shy away from that type of interaction. When you move to a digital space, you open up the opportunity for engagement to a set of individuals who can then take the time to kind of craft what they want, possibly post anonymously, see information that they otherwise wouldn't have seen. So they get access to a bunch of more information, and you're drawing in a different population of learners to participate. Obviously, we're always looking at engagement. Are people actually using this community? How are they using it? And then can we actually influence grades in the classroom? There's one other thing listed here that's not listed here that we also really focus on, and we'll talk about in the outcomes section, and that is the efficiency for you at the institution. It's one thing to create these opportunities for learners and to give them, the space to talk to each other and to do all these amazing things for them. But if it costs you twice as much money or twice as much time, it's not sustainable. So the digital community strategy is particularly valuable because it achieves all these outcomes, but also makes the process of supporting students more efficient for the institution and gives them time back in their day. So those are the outcomes that we really look at. Let me pause there, Danielle. Any comments or questions in the chat that I should draw in at this moment?
I actually just posted in the chat. If you have any questions, please drop them in there. Yes, we will be sending out the recording, so please look for an email from Fred Scott either this afternoon or early tomorrow morning. We have a couple partners on the call, Katie, as you mentioned before. Thank you, Karen, for sharing your experience at Rio Salado and how you all are using these peer-to-peer communities. And then a lot of folks here, just in the student success area, really looking for how to connect their learners. So they came to the right place.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so have the questions come in. As I said, I'm happy to stop, and it's good to interrupt me periodically, so I take a little bit of a breath. So I'm just going to spend a quick second on what is a peer community, because as I mentioned, we're actually going to dig into the product a little bit later. But very high level, this peer community, as I mentioned, it kind of lives above the classroom. It is meant to be as inclusive as possible. So we generally recommend to our partners, you can certainly build a community around an individual program or an individual, college within an institution. But our recommendation is if you can bring all your students together across your population into this space, it is the best outcome for you and for them. Rio Salado is a great example of that. They launched their community for all of their online and in-person students across the entire population. I think 14,000, there might be higher than that, in fact. But it was really a come one, come all. And by creating that virtual space, it makes it easy to do that because you can really welcome in. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're, commuting to school or learning online. It doesn't matter what time zone you're in. You can come to this space and know that it is a collection of people that you can rely on and interact with. The other important thing about these communities is they're really designed to be a safe space. So you want your students to feel like they can trust these communities and that it's a place where they can thrive and build authentic relationships. One of the ways that we accomplish that is by partnering with our institutions to bring the student voice into the design process. Again, Rio did a really wonderful job of that when we worked with them. Fort Hays State University, who some of you may know in Kansas, also did a great job. And it was about drawing from student leadership at the school to say, what do you want your community to be? What should we call it? What do you want to talk about in this space? And when you do that, you will find that your students gravitate really quickly to the community and really feel like a sense of ownership over what's happening there. There are some ways that we can also keep an eye on what's happening in the community to make sure that it stays a safe space. And I'll show you that in the demo. And then this really speaks to both the equity and the efficiency component of the community. What happens in your InScribe community is that as conversations take place, they become part of a searchable repository. So unlike some products where, if you missed a conversation and it goes off the page and you come in 2 days later, it's like that conversation never happened. So we didn't want that to happen in InScribe. So there's lots of ways that students can search, have conversations pushed to them. And what that means for you is if a question gets answered, you don't have to answer it 300 more times. What it means for the students is they get access to all the information that the other students had access to. So they don't have to be in there every day all the time. They can come in and find that knowledge that other people have generated and then learn from it. Access is really important. We have sort of these 4 Ps that we talk about when we're launching a community, purpose being the thing that we just talked about, and placement being one of the others. You need your community to be deeply integrated into the workflows that you're already using. If it's a space that sits far apart, your students are unlikely to go there or even remember that it exists. So we do that through a lot of integrations. We integrate really tightly into like websites and portals, LMS, some courseware. But really we ask our partners, like, what are your students already going and how do we create authentic integration points there? The other way we do it is by really reaching out to the student and letting them know when things are happening. So we have a really robust notification system. We have a native mobile app so students can just have their community in their pocket. But always our intention is how do you make the community easy to access and at their fingertips when they need it? And that's how you really make it relevant. And finally, I just wanted to share a little bit about some of the examples of what we tend to see in these types of communities. So these are some examples that our partners have been really generous to share in previous webinars. And I think so these are real examples of conversations that have taken place in partner communities. And I think they really highlight kind of the high level types of benefits and interactions that you're going to see. So one is really just about meeting people. And if you're a non-traditional student and you're learning online or commuting to school, meeting those individuals can be a challenge. And what we see in the community is people are thrilled to sort of jump in and say who they are, where they're coming from, what their background is, and the number of other individuals that will then jump in and connect with them. Out of these relationships, we see study groups form, we see meetups happen. It's just another way for students to start to create peer bonds that will sustain them, over the course of their learning and beyond. Obviously, answering questions is a huge part of this. In these peer communities, we see sort of 2 models of this. sometimes students will ask a question and a member of your staff might jump in to answer if it's, something about registration or financial aid. But a lot of times the questions are really questions of advice. What was it like to do this? Has anybody experienced that before? And in those cases, students really want to hear from each other. They want to hear that authentic voice. One of the other opportunities here is maybe to bring some alumni into your community and have them talk a little bit about their experience, having gone through your program and now, potentially out in the career world. So you see a lot of really positive types of interactions coming from this. The third big thing that we see is really about more emotional support and just really supporting each other, particularly around things like imposter syndrome or feeling stressed out about certain areas. So this is a really great example from Fort Hays. We had a individual come in, you can see the post there, but really it was about an older student coming back and just feeling like, maybe I don't belong here and I shouldn't have done this. And we have a few examples of some of the responses that came in, but actually this post received, you can see 20 responses within about 3 hours. The view count there is now up over the thousands. And, what the perspective of our partner was, if this community allowed this one individual to gain confidence and the confidence they needed to persist in this program, then it has accomplished its goal. And so what you will see in these spaces is a lot of very positive types of support and interaction coming directly from your students to students. And the last thing, which is a little practical, is that it's a great way to just communicate out to your learners. So if you have events, activities, important messages that you want to get out, it is a wonderful notification system. And you can just see a few examples here. This is the number of views that this post got just in a couple of hours. So using InScribe as another way to reach out to those individuals can be very, very effective. Danielle, before I get into that, any questions?
I don't have any questions. We have a couple of comments. Jeannie shared that the posts, where students are becoming vulnerable and sharing that this is, they're just getting back into it. Those are her favorite posts. And I know she gets to see a lot of those, which is lovely. And then Karen mentioned that the more honest we are, it really makes people feel like they're included, right? It makes them feel like they're not alone in this process. So thank you, Karen and Jeannie, for your comments. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, I can't overstate that. It only takes one person in your community being willing to be vulnerable to open up the willingness of many other individuals to then jump in and say that. Because the reality is one person is going to say it, but like half the community is actually thinking it and feeling it. And so it validates the feelings of all these individuals. It shows them that they're not the only one thinking that or worrying about that. And it goes a long way to increasing their confidence and their sense of connection. And I can't emphasize enough, like, it's so simple to implement this strategy, and that positive outcomes that come are, if you think about the scales of implementation versus outcome, the outcomes so outweigh the work of implementation that it's just a really easy solution to accomplish a lot of goals. And here are some of the outcomes that our customers have been reporting. So we mentioned this idea of efficiency. We have a few schools who actually measure the number of emails that they're getting, and they reported back a minimum about a 23% decrease in the number of support requests. At maximum, we had somebody actually report an 80% decrease. So those are real hours back in your day that you can spend interacting with students in higher order ways, in higher touch ways. We do know that students participating in our community were much more likely to stay enrolled and persist. Jumping down here, we also saw that participation led to better grades and better outcomes. So significant reduction in the number of students failing or withdrawing, as well as an increase in the number of students gaining mastery. And then this really speaks to what we were talking about. We did a study with Rio Salado College about the impact on sense of belonging and peer connection. And in just 6 weeks, students who were interacting with the community reported a 40% higher measure of belonging than those who didn't. And that wasn't just self-selecting for the people who came into the community, because we did the study at 2 points in time. And one of the populations was a population of learners who hadn't used the community to begin with, and their sense of belonging measure was lower. And then 6 weeks later, they had been participating in the community, and they also saw that increase rising up to meet the students who were at that 40% level. So very short time period, really significant outcomes. Okay, I think with that, we'll actually take a look at the platform. So let me make sure we have a good amount of time. Okay, so just to, and I'm going to do a real high level here. We don't have a ton of time. I just want to kind of touch on some of the capabilities and the advantages. If you want a deeper dive or a custom demo for your institution, just reach out to Danielle or Fred, or post something in the chat, and we can get that set. We can really kind of dig into your use case. But just to orient you, so we're in the InScribe institution here and in the student peer community. When a student comes in, the first thing they're going to see is this onboarding workflow. So you have the opportunity to introduce the student to the community, give them a little video that talks about it, introduce the community norms, and then we'll walk them through a series of steps like updating their profile, following topics that are interesting to them, making their first post in the community. But it's really, again, going back to that issue of that topic of trust. What is this community for, and how do I engage with it? So we're helping to build that right from the outset. Once the student is in the community, it's primarily organized by these topic areas, which we see down below. So you can see there's a nice sort of collection of topics of all different types, right? And really kind of addressing the things that students are most likely to want to engage around. We, based on our work, have recommendations for you on what topics we've seen work really well, but this is all customizable. So if you have particular things that you know your students are thinking about, this can all be redesigned to align with that. Up above here, the other thing that you'll see are what we call our channels. So you have the opportunity to create subgroups in your community, and that's especially valuable if you have a really big community, let's say many thousands of users. And this gives you the opportunity to create smaller groups that might have a shared identity, a shared background, or just need a smaller space to communicate and interact with each other. You can see some examples here. Again, these are very customizable and are designed to reflect back the personas of the students that you work with. When a student, I would say, when students come into the community, part of the time they're just curious. And so this structure that you provide in terms of the topics and the channels creates a guide map for them as they're exploring the community to really understand what it's about and where they might want to go. Other students are going to come in because they have a specific question or they're looking for some kind of advice. Now, the first thing they can do is search the community. So all of the content is searchable. One of the topics that students get stumped on, I know a lot, are like APA citations. So student might start searching for that, find that there's a conversation around that, and jump to it. So I can see, oh, this person had the same conversation or same question as me. It's been answered. I got exactly what I needed. I didn't need to wait for anybody. I'm off and running. So that's a good example of that reusability of content. I also might be looking, for a study group. So I start to look for a study group. I can find that somebody's interested in starting one. I can respond to them and connect and get started there. So lots of ways, again, to reuse the content that's already been created. Now, that's not always going to be the case that your question has been answered. So we make it really easy for students to jump in and start to engage with the platform. And the primary way they would do that is by responding to or starting a new conversation. So when I go into that process, we can see that a student can either ask a question or share something. So here's like, I need help. Here's I'm contributing something that to the community I think you might find valuable. And there's lots of cool things they can do. Bring in images and videos, emojis. We try to, give it the flexibility for students to really create what they want to create. Keep it simple, or you can add a little bit more flair. But the thing I really want to point out here is that we also focus a lot on giving students control over how they are viewed and represented in the space. And one of the ways we do that is when they post, we allow them to choose how that post is going to be visible. So you can either post like it's from Katie and everyone in the community can see it. You can also post anonymously. So if you're a little nervous about, that first level of participation, you can post it so that your identity is not visible to the members, but they can all see the question. Or you can post privately just to the moderators of the community. What we see is that when communities first launch, there's a little more, activity in these areas. And then as students get used to it, really understand what it's about, they tend to move up into this space as well. Most people start here, though, I would say. You can also add a quick poll if you want to get, feedback from people. Students can post those as well. So it's just a fun way to engage. When a question any questions, Danielle?
No questions, yeah.
Okay. I see Jeannie is very active in the chat. So thank you, Jeannie. When the question gets posted, one of the key elements of the community is that it alerts all the community members that that post exists. So we're not waiting for you to come in and check. We're reaching out to the community members to draw them back in. Those notifications go through email or natively through your mobile app, and they're totally customizable. So each student can decide, what notifications do I want to receive? How frequently do I want to receive them? Do I want to get them right away? Do I want more of a summary? Do I want to snooze that notification? So that's critical. And you can see sort of the granularity that we allow people to make that decision. That is really critical so that you don't have students shut off completely. You want them to be able to get the information they want when they want it. There's no limit to the number of responses. Let me find something here that has a good number of responses. These are all one and done. That has to. So there's no limit to the number of responses that come in. People can come in and give feedback. If you can see that I carry this little, I carry this little badge with me in the community. I don't know if you can see that. It's really tiny. It's a little green badge. So when I post, that little green badge will be visible. That's because this person is a moderator in this community. So when a moderator posts, there's a visual cue for the students to see what that came from. If a student posts a great post, a moderator can come in and endorse it. So this has been endorsed. It adds that little iconography and it gives the student credit for making a great contribution or a great post to the community. So it's also about letting students understand, when am I getting feedback from a peer and when am I getting feedback from more of an authority figure or an expert at the institution. So one of the questions we often get, I will say, in our communities is, how do you make sure that students are behaving themselves? How do you make sure that that communities are staying healthy and on track? And there are a couple of tools that we have in place to help with that. The reality is we very rarely, as in almost never, see students, I would say, misbehave in these spaces. And I think part of it is because, unlike a different type of social media application that is separate from the other tools at their institution, because InScribe is integrated directly into those spaces, it's very clear to students that this is part of their professional learning experience. And I think they then bring with them a slightly different perspective on how they're going to interact and engage. So I think in a course of business over 5-6 years, we've had maybe 2 incidents total, and that's over hundreds of thousands of students and posts. With that said, we do want to create some tooling to help people know if and when something is happening. So one way we do that is we have a list of keywords. You can customize it. If one of those appears in a post, our platform will flag it and let you know. The other way that we do it is by running the conversations through a sentiment API. So we're actually measuring the emotion of the conversation. And if Rosie's our technology assistant that lives in our communities, if Rosie senses that a post is presenting negative emotion like angry or upset or confused, she will flag it behind the scenes and escalate it to the moderators. So the student can't see this flag, but it's a way to alert you that this is a high priority conversation that you might want to come in and take a look at. Oftentimes what it means is just that this is a student who is particularly struggling. They haven't posted anything inappropriate, but it might be somebody that you want to get on your radar and potentially reach out to directly or have a more direct intervention with. So the more that we can do to help you understand the priorities of your students and who needs help, like the better off for you and for those learners.
Hey, Katie.
Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, we do have a question from our good friend Fred. So he asked, how many hours per week would our moderators have to be in the community? And this is a question that he hears quite a bit from our friends out in the industry. And so if you could just answer that question, that'd be awesome.
Yes, and I will answer generally. And I also encourage, if any of our partners have an opinion on this, please jump in and answer as well. Depends a little bit on the type of community, but these peer communities are actually designed to be the less is more, I guess is kind of what we say. It's really about students helping each other. And as moderators, you're kind of observing and maybe shepherding, but not necessarily directly interacting all the time. And a space like this, you might have 1 or 2 hours a week that somebody would spend reviewing what's happening in there, kind of checking the health of the community, maybe working with our team around some operational items, but definitely not a full-time person, and definitely not super interruptive of the work that you're already doing. The other thing that we like to mention is oftentimes InScribe replaces work that that individual was doing somewhere else. So in the case of the emails, because the questions were coming through InScribe and they were answering them there, it meant that they weren't having to answer them in email. And instead of answering 50 emails, they answered one question in InScribe. So they actually had, they were spending a couple hours in InScribe, but it was compared to spending 20 hours in email like they were doing before. So that's usually what we hear from folks.
Thank you.
Did that help? Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to quickly touch on resources. Conversations is really the heart of your community, and that's where the students are going to be participating. We have a little resources area where you can put articles, videos, things that a little bit more curated set of assets. And so I just lost my train of thought. So mostly for the moderators to post here, but it would be more like sort of fully formed assets that you might have. And then I'm going to jump into our live feature, but I see Debbie just raised her hand. Danielle, do I do something?
I see that too. I guess I would just encourage Debbie to drop the question that she has maybe in the chat. And I see her hand is no longer raised. So maybe that was an accident.
And then the last thing I want to touch on, which we're really excited about, is called our live sessions area. So you've probably noticed as we've been talking about the platform, it is very asynchronous. And that was by design. When we started InScribe, we wanted to like flexibility, on demand. Those were the key elements that the students were telling us were most important to them. And asynchronous was the best way to accomplish that. As the product was in market, we started to find more and more examples of where synchronous interaction would also be a valuable tool. And so part of our vision for the next year, which we started, you can see we've started to build that here and we're extending into next year, is building more synchronous opportunities into the product and essentially creating a community where you can move seamlessly between asynchronous and synchronous communication. So the very start of that is our live sessions feature, where you can come in and schedule create a scheduled live session and host that sort of through your InScribe application. You can see that these are actually live now, and then we have some others that happened in the past. If I go into one of these, it'll show you the start time. It'll allow you to join directly from here, and you can post some feedback to the individual hosting that event prior to the event. The way that it works is that you just give it a date and time and a title, and then you put in whatever meeting tool you want to use. So to be clear, there's not like a separate InScribe meeting tool you would need to use if you're already using Zoom, Teams, InSpace. You can put those links into here, and then students will be able to access it directly from here. Jeannie can talk more about the impact of this feature on synchronous events, because I know she hears a lot about it from our customers. But certainly things like study sessions, office hours, guest speakers, where they would get maybe like 3 or 4 or 10 people show up. Now they're getting 20 or 30 or 40. So it really amplifies the reach of those events. And then you grab the recording, bring it back, put it into InScribe so anyone who couldn't attend can still watch that recording and feel like they were part of that experience. Going
There's-
forward, we're going to be extending. Oh, yeah.
No, you keep going. I mean, there's a question in the chat,
Okay.
but you find a good stopping spot.
I'll finish this point and then I'll circle back to that. Going forward, we are currently implementing chat. So you'll be able to jump into essentially like live chat with other members of the community. And we are working on integrating video conferencing capabilities as well. And we're going to do probably a whole separate session on that. So look for that to come out soon. And will be 3 ways to do that. You can schedule these in advance. You can do what we call jump to live, which is you're in a conversation that's asynchronous, but you want to like talk more quickly or share something, and you could jump from that conversation into a live session. Or students can pre-schedule these spaces to just have them open indefinitely, like they could drop into a study hall or someplace like that. But that's a big part of what we're going to be working on over the next year. Danielle.
Well, you answered John's question. So his question was, can students chat individually with each other? If a student has a question about connecting to study together, can an interested student respond individually to a student another student? So you answered that question. Anything you'd like to add?
No. That was a great, perfect timing on that question, John. You nailed it. And I know we only have a few minutes, so I'm going to just touch quickly on the analytics capabilities of the platform as well. So as a moderator, I have access to the community admin area. Here we can see all the members of our community. I can dig into an individual to see what they've been up to. All the, like a summary of all, well, Veronica has not been very active. Let's find somebody more interesting. A summary of what they've been up to, and you can also see here our reputation system. So the members of your community will get credit for the work that they do in their InScribe community, whether that's starting a conversation, responding to somebody else. They can build these reputation points, which are then reflected here. One thing that was very important to us is that we didn't just reward behavior for posting, but that we also rewarded the behavior of consuming, because that is probably the most common type of activity you're going to see in your community. It is a sign of a healthy community when you have a lot of people in there looking, and we wanted to give credit to the people that were participating in that. So you see this good listener badge, which is really about, am I viewing things? Am I like reacting to people who are posting in the space? You can also go into like really detailed views of what individuals are doing. Again, this, and then go back to the community admin. And then again, this community admin area is just for the moderators. The profile page is something that anybody can see. We also have some analytics that give you a summary of what's happening in your community over time. So you can get a sense of when are people coming in? Are we seeing peaks in activity? For example, well, sometimes we see a big peak in activity at the beginning of the year before exams are going to happen. When new cohorts come in, you can get a sense of what your students are most interested in interacting with. And then you can export all of this information. So if you want to bring it out of the system into a spreadsheet, you can do that as well. These are these are community by community reports. You can also do this type of reporting at the institution level. So it'll give you that information across all of your communities. And if you really are interested in doing a lot of deep data analytics, we have a much larger data set, what we would call learning event level data. So sort of interaction by interaction across the platform that we can provide to you through API or some sort of export. It's a giant file. So we don't make it available here, but just know that we are big believers that we do not want to control the data. We want to share the data, and we want to make sure that you're able to connect it with other information you have about that student so you can create a holistic picture of what's going on. And anything we can do to support you in that effort, we definitely want to do. All right, we have about 5 minutes left. Is there anything you wanted me to talk about, Danielle, that I didn't touch on?
Oh, wow. I think you touched on most everything that we had planned today.
I think I
don't
did
see
too.
any questions in the chat at the moment. And I don't know, is there a way to unmute people if they want to come on live? I feel like there should be.
Let's find out. If you want, I think you have to do it one by one. But if you'd be interested in coming in and chatting or asking questions in person, please raise your hand and we'll bring you in. So that was just a high level overview. Again, I went pretty quickly. There are a lot of sort of subtleties to how that all works that we could dig into much more deeply. But I think really thinking about these outcomes and which of these are things that you're thinking about at your institution. It may not be all of them. It may be just one or two areas where you're really trying to make a change or move the needle. But again, the simplicity of implementation and the fact that you can impact such a broad area of outcomes for your students, your faculty, and your staff, I think makes a digital community strategy something that institutions really should be looking at and thinking about in both the short term and the long term. So again, if you have any questions about that, if you'd like to learn more about the product or get a deeper demo, post in the chat. You can reach out to me directly through email. Do you have my LinkedIn, Danielle? Do you want to drop that in there as well?
Yeah, I'll drop that in there again. I also dropped in some of our partner success stories, and then I'll drop in a link if you'd like to schedule an additional conversation as well.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend if you go to the partner success stories, for this particular topic around peer communities, look for the study that we did with Rio Salado, look for the case study that we put together with Fort Hays State, because they've both done a really wonderful job and really approached this community development from, I think, the right perspective. But on there, you'll also see some of the other use cases that I just mentioned at the very beginning. So if you're thinking about any of those areas, you can learn a little bit more about the product there as well.